The West Texas wind carried dust devils across the empty auction yard as Trent Baker counted the crumpled bills in his wallet one more time. $43. That's all that stood between him and complete financial ruin. The bank had already sent the final notice. He had 60 days to come up with 3 months of missed mortgage payments, or the 800-acre ranch that had been in his family for 4 generations would be gone. At 42 years old, Trent looked like a man who'd lived a much harder life. The ranch outside Abilene had been struggling for years, but the past 18 months had been catastrophic. Cattle prices had collapsed just as feed costs skyrocketed. He'd sold off most of his herd at a loss, watching generations of careful breeding disappear to slaughterhouses for pennies on the dollar. His wife Amanda had left 6 months ago, taking their daughter to live with her sister in Fort Worth. She'd stopped believing in the ranch long before she stopped believing in their marriage. Now Trent came to the livestock auction every Wednesday, not to buy, but to watch, a masochistic ritual that reminded him of everything he'd lost. He sat on the weathered bleachers as lot after lot sold. Healthy cattle, good horses, breeding stock that people with money could afford. Each sale was another reminder of the life that was slipping away. Lot 73, the auctioneer announced, his voice lacking its usual enthusiasm. Border Collie mix, approximately 4 months old. Owner deceased, estate surrendering. Selling as is. Trent looked up to see the sorriest excuse for a dog he'd ever witnessed being carried into the ring in a wire crate. The puppy was so small and emaciated, she looked more like a rat than a dog. Her coat was a mottled, muddy color, caked with dried feces and missing patches where mange had taken hold. She was painfully thin, every rib visible, hip bones jutting out like coat hangers. One eye was crusted shut with infection, and she held her right front paw off the ground, unwilling to put weight on it. She looked more dead than alive. The crowd's reaction was immediate. People turned away. Some laughed. Others shook their heads in disgust that anyone would bring such a pitiful creature to auction. "Let's start the bidding at $20, the auctioneer tried. Silence. $10. Anyone give me $10? Nothing. People were already looking at their phones, waiting for the next lot. $5. The auctioneer's voice had gone flat. Folks, I've got to sell this puppy. Give me $1. Still nothing. The handler stood in the ring, looking embarrassed, holding the crate with a dog that trembled uncontrollably inside. "All right, 50 cents, the auctioneer finally said. 50 cents, or she goes straight to animal control for disposal. Do I hear 50 cents? Something made Trent look at the puppy more carefully. Despite her condition, maybe because of it, there was something in the way she held herself. Even sick and starving, even with one eye swollen shut, she wasn't cowering in the back of the crate. She sat upright with a dignity that seemed impossible, given her circumstances. And when her one good eye found Trent in the crowd, he felt a jolt of recognition he couldn't explain. His hand went up before he could think better of it. 50 cents to the gentleman in the back, the auctioneer said quickly, clearly relieved to move on. Sold. As Trent walked down to claim his purchase, he could feel the eyes on him. People thought he was either crazy or cruel for taking on an animal that probably wouldn't survive the week. Hell, they were probably right. He had no money for vet care, barely enough feed for his last 2 ranch dogs, and no logical reason to burden himself with another mouth he couldn't afford to feed. But as he gently picked up the crate and the tiny puppy looked up at him with that one good eye, Trent felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense of purpose beyond his own survival. Trent named her 50, both as a reminder of what she'd cost and as a promise that despite her rough start, she would grow into something more. Getting her home was an ordeal. She was too weak to walk, so he carried her in the crate, wincing at how light she was. Couldn't have weighed more than 8 pounds. Trent drove carefully the whole way back to the ranch, terrified that every bump in the road would be too much for the fragile creature. His remaining two dogs, an aging Australian cattle dog named Buck and a mixed breed named Rosie, who was too old to work cattle anymore, watched with mild interest as Trent settled 50 in a corner of the mudroom. He used old blankets to make her a bed and gave her water in a shallow bowl, since she seemed too weak to lift her head properly. That first night, Trent slept in a chair in the mudroom. He told himself it was to monitor her condition. But the truth was simpler. The ranch house felt too empty, too full of memories of Amanda and their daughter. At least here, with the gentle sounds of dogs breathing in the darkness, he didn't feel quite so alone. 50 survived the night, then another, then a week. Trent couldn't afford a vet, but he'd grown up on this ranch and learned animal care from his grandfather. He cleaned her infected eye with warm salt water and treated the mange with medicated shampoo he found in the barn, left over from treating a horse years ago. He fed her small amounts frequently, knowing her starved system couldn't handle much at once. He examined her injured paw carefully and determined it was badly bruised but not broken, probably from being stepped on or kicked. He carried her outside multiple times a day, letting her rest on the grass in the sun, slowly building her strength. The transformation took months, but it was remarkable. By late fall, 50's coat had shed out to reveal something unexpected. She was a stunning blue merle, black, gray, and white, in a marbled pattern that was absolutely beautiful. Her build was lean and athletic, with alert, intelligent eyes that seemed to track everything. As she filled out, Trent realized she wasn't just a Border Collie mix. She looked like a purebred, with the classic build and markings of the breed. More interesting was her personality. Most dogs that survived the kind of neglect 50 had endured became either fearful or aggressive. 50 was neither. She was curious, affectionate, and showed a confidence that seemed bred into her bones rather than learned from experience. But what really set 50 apart emerged the day Trent turned her loose with his two remaining cattle. He'd kept a pair of cows, ornery old crossbreeds that were too tough and mean to sell. They'd broken through 3 different fence lines that month, and Trent was at his wits' end, trying to keep them contained. That morning, he'd opened the gate to move them to a different pasture, and as usual, they'd scattered in opposite directions, refusing to cooperate. 50, now 8 months old and healthy, was following Trent around like she always did. As Trent jogged after one of the cows, cursing under his breath, he noticed the young dog watching intently. Then, without any prompting or training, 50 began to move. She approached the cow with her body low to the ground, ears forward, eyes locked on the animal with laser focus. Her movement was fluid, almost choreographed, like she was performing a dance she'd rehearsed 1,000 times. When the cow tried to veer left, 50 was already there, blocking the move with her body. When the cow attempted to break right, 50 mirrored the movement perfectly, anticipating it before it happened. Within 30 seconds, the young dog had maneuvered the stubborn cow exactly where Trent wanted her. Then she immediately went after the second cow without being asked, working with the same precision and intensity. Trent stood frozen, watching in amazement. He'd worked herding dogs before, dogs trained specifically to move livestock, but he'd never seen anything like this. 50 had no training whatsoever. She was operating purely on instinct, and her instinct was better than dogs he'd seen that had years of professional training. She read the cattle's body language before the animals themselves knew which way they would turn. She had an innate sense of distance, timing, and pressure that trainers spent years trying to teach. She moved in perfect balance, never pushing too hard or too soft, adjusting her approach based on each animal's response. Over the next few weeks, Trent began testing 50's abilities more deliberately. Every time he needed to move the cows, he'd let 50 work. The young dog never failed to understand what was needed, moving with an intelligence and anticipation that bordered on supernatural. "That's the damnedest thing I've ever seen," said Clayton Briggs, Trent's neighbor, watching 50 work one afternoon. Clayton ran a much larger operation and had several trained herding dogs. "How long you been training her?" "I haven't," Trent admitted. "She just knows." Clayton studied 50 more carefully, watching her drop into a perfect crouch, eyes locked on the cattle, body coiled and ready. "You said you got her at auction. You know anything about her breeding?" "Nothing. She came from an estate sale. No papers, no information." "Well, she's got to have working Border Collie in her somewhere. That's not the kind of ability that just appears." Clayton paused. "You ever thought about competing with her?" The question seemed absurd. Trent barely had money for feed. Competition herding dogs were expensive investments with pedigrees as long as your arm. They trained for years with professional handlers and specialized facilities. The idea that his 50-cent rescue puppy could compete in that world was laughable. But Clayton wouldn't let it go. Over the next month, he kept bringing it up, finally offering to sponsor Trent's entry into a small regional herding trial in Lubbock. "Just to see what she can do," Clayton insisted. "Entry fees on me. If she embarrasses herself, no harm done. But if she's got what I think she's got..." Trent agreed, mostly because he had nothing left to lose. The competition was 3 months away, giving him time to work with 50 every day. But work was hardly the right word. 50 didn't need training in the conventional sense. She needed practice and physical conditioning, but her understanding of livestock handling was already sophisticated beyond anything Trent could have taught her. The Lubbock trial was small, maybe 40 entries, mostly local ranchers and semi-professional handlers. Trent felt completely out of place, pulling up in his rusty pickup while other competitors arrived in luxury trucks and trailers. 50 looked healthy now, even beautiful. But she was still young and carried none of the polish of dogs that spent their lives in professional training programs. When their turn came, Trent walked 50 to the starting position with his stomach in knots. The format was simple. They'd have a set time to move a small group of sheep through a course, demonstrating 50's ability to gather, drive, and pen the livestock with precision and control. What happened next shocked everyone present. 50 exploded into action with a precision and intensity that left the judges sitting forward in their seats. She read the sheep like she could see the future, anticipating every move before it happened. Her positioning was perfect, never too close, never too far. She applied pressure with surgical precision, easing off the moment the sheep responded, then reapplying it exactly when and where needed. She worked with an intensity that seemed almost supernatural. This wasn't a learned behavior. This was a calling. When their time ended, the arena went silent for a moment before erupting in applause. Trent had never competed before, and barely knew if they'd done well, but the looks on people's faces told him something extraordinary had just happened. 50 won the competition. Not just won. She dominated, with a score that would have been impressive at a national event, let alone a regional one. Afterward, Trent was surrounded by trainers, breeders, and competitors asking about 50's bloodline, her training program, whether she was for sale. One man offered him $50,000 on the spot. Another offered $75,000. A woman from a major breeding program in Montana pulled Trent aside and said, "I don't know where you found her, but that dog has the best natural herding instinct I've seen in 30 years. Whatever you do, don't sell her cheap." Trent drove home that night in a daze, a first-place ribbon on the seat beside him and a check for $5,000 in prize money, more cash than he'd seen in 2 years. But more than the money, he felt something else. Validation. Maybe he wasn't crazy. Maybe this 50-cent puppy that nobody wanted was actually something special. Over the next year, 50 became a sensation in the herding dog world. At every competition, regional, state, and eventually national events, she dominated. By the time she was 3 years old, she'd won over $200,000 in prize money and attracted attention from the biggest names in the sport. But the real money came from breeding rights and business opportunities that emerged from 50's success. Breeding offers started at $100,000 per litter and quickly escalated. Everyone wanted puppies from the dog with the most natural herding ability anyone had ever seen. Trent was careful, selective, working with veterinarians and geneticists to create a sustainable breeding program. 50's first litter sold for an average of $50,000 per puppy. The second litter went for even more. More significantly, Trent's success with 50 attracted people who wanted to learn his training methods. He tried to explain that he hadn't really trained her. She was just naturally gifted, but people insisted there must be something he was doing right. They were willing to pay substantial fees for training clinics and consultations. This led Trent to a realization. While 50's ability was exceptional, his approach to working with her, respecting her instincts, allowing her natural talents to guide the training rather than imposing rigid methods, could be applied more broadly. He began developing a training philosophy based on observation and partnership rather than domination. The Baker method became sought after across the herding dog world. Trent wrote a book, started a YouTube channel, and eventually opened a training facility on his ranch that attracted clients from across the country. People paid $10,000 per month to have their dogs trained using his approach, and there was a waiting list 2 years long. But the most shocking discovery came when 50 was 4 years old. A veterinarian examining her for breeding purposes noticed something unusual in her conformation and suggested a DNA test. The results revealed that 50 was a direct descendant of Old Hemp, one of the most legendary Border Collies in history. The dog considered the foundation sire of the modern Border Collie breed, whose specific bloodline, through certain branches, was thought to have died out decades ago. This revelation sent shockwaves through the Border Collie breeding world. 50 wasn't just naturally talented. She carried genetics from the foundation of the breed itself. Genetics that breeders had assumed were lost forever through certain family lines. Her value skyrocketed overnight. Breeding offers reached 7 figures. A syndicate of breeders offered Trent $5 million for 50% ownership, which he accepted while retaining control over her care and breeding decisions. Her puppies were selling for over $100,000 each before they were even born, with waiting lists of buyers hoping to access the rediscovered bloodline. 5 years after buying a dying puppy for 50 cents, Trent Baker was worth over $40 million. The ranch was transformed. He'd paid off the mortgage within a year of 50's first major win. Now he'd expanded it to 2,000 acres with state-of-the-art training facilities, climate-controlled kennels, and a staff of 15. The Baker Training Center was one of the premier herding dog facilities in the country, boasting a client list that included celebrities, professional athletes, and wealthy ranchers from around the world. But perhaps more importantly, Trent had reconciled with Amanda. She'd followed 50's success in the news, and one day she'd called tentatively, asking if she and their daughter could visit the ranch. That visit had led to long conversations about what had gone wrong and whether they could find their way back to each other. They'd remarried a year later, and Amanda had been instrumental in building the business side of Trent's empire, bringing organizational skills and business acumen that complemented his dog training expertise. One evening, 6 years after that dusty auction, Trent stood in 50's luxurious kennel suite at the training center. The dog who'd once been hours from death now lived in comfort that would make most humans jealous. She'd just had her third litter, 6 puppies that already showed signs of their mother's exceptional talent. "You know what's wild?" Trent said to Amanda, who'd come out to check on the new puppies. "If even one other person at that auction had bid 50 cents, none of this would have happened. I barely had enough to cover the auction fee." "But no one else saw what you saw," Amanda replied, wrapping an arm around his waist. "I didn't see anything," Trent admitted. "I just felt something, like she was meant to be here." 50 patted over, pressing her head against Trent's leg in a gesture of affection that had become their nightly ritual. Despite the success, the wealth, the acclaim, she was still just a dog who remembered the man who'd given her a chance when no one else would. "Best 50 cents anyone ever spent," Amanda said, scratching behind 50's ears. "Best 50 cents anyone could spend," Trent corrected. "She didn't just save the ranch. She saved me." The herding dog world had been transformed by 50's influence. Her offspring were winning competitions across the country. The Baker method had become standard teaching at major training facilities, and the rediscovered bloodline had reinvigorated breeding programs that had been stagnating for decades. But for Trent, standing in that kennel with his wife and the dog that had changed everything, the real wealth wasn't measured in dollars or trophies. It was measured in second chances. The chance 50 got to survive. The chance he got to save his family's legacy. And the chance both of them got to prove that worth isn't determined by price tags or first impressions. A puppy that nobody wanted for 50 cents had become the foundation of a multi-million-dollar empire. But more than that, she'd become proof that sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones everyone else overlooks. If this story moved you, make sure you're subscribed to Second Chance Stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss another incredible tale of rescue and redemption. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that every ending can become a new beginning, and that sometimes the smallest investments yield the most extraordinary returns. Drop a comment telling us about a time when you took a chance on something or someone that everyone else had given up on. And remember, just like Trent and 50 showed us, the things we rescue often end up rescuing us right back. Sometimes all it takes is 50 cents and the courage to believe when no one else will. Because every dog deserves a second chance, and every story of hope deserves to be told. Thanks for watching.